Yeah, nice to see you all here. So this evening's theme is, it's quite a long title, Uniting the Myths, Dharma and hashtag, not hashtag, colon, semicolon, Dharma and Dragons, or honouring the different aspects of ourselves. So yeah, so those of you who are major dragon fans, I'm slightly sad to disappoint you, but this isn't particularly a talk about dragons specifically. Yeah.
See ya.
Because really what I want to talk about is, well, dragons are a meaningful myth to me and to some of you, but for some of you they aren't meaningful myths. So really what we're talking about is the significance and place of myth in our lives. And don't worry, we're going to have plenty of time in groups, so all of the dragon aficionados can go and give full body to that in the public groups. So let's do some defining of terms. So this word myth is a word that is it has quite a lot of different meanings, doesn't it? So let's just quite simply and quickly identify the two kind of core meanings. So I'm not using the word myth in the sense of made up, irrelevant, insignificant things. So, you know, people, that classic when people say things like, oh, that's just an urban myth, it's a myth. So it's the use of the word myth to communicate something which is unimportant or insignificant or not real. So that's definitely not the use of the word, not the meaning of myth that we're using here. I'm using the word myth here to mean myths as these sort of like the deep stories of our culture, our world, and specifically our lives. So obviously in kind of like in human history, we've got these kind of like, so when we hear this word myths, we think of like, I don't know, like the Greek myths or the Norse myths or, you know, Egyptian myths or Mesoamerican myths, or whatever, all of these kind of these cultural stories. And of course, what myth in that sense means is these meaning-making stories, the stories which explain, help us understand what it is to be a human being. So I'm using the word myth in this sense. So that's what I mean by myth. And so then the next question is, like, why should we care? Who cares about myths? You know, like I've just referenced Greek myths or the ancient myths of culture. Or you could say the contemporary myths of, you know, the Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, James Bond, or Four Weddings and a Funeral. All of these, they're myths, they're stories. And of course, some of this will be, you'll have thought of this for yourselves before, you'll express this in different ways. But I suppose the core reason why I talk about this, and some of you will be familiar, this is one of the themes which I return to again and again. So it obviously is important to me. This obviously got something to do with my myth, as it were. And this is this core question of why should we care? The reason we should care is because this is where life is, this is where energy is. The myths of our lives are what moves us. And there's nothing, that's an exaggeration, but it is a sad thing to live a life which we aren't moved by. So, I suppose to speak personally, when as a young child, the thing that I struggle to fully articulate when this became important to me. I can't kind of get back further from this. But sort of one of the foundational stories of my life, one of the foundational myths of my life, is that life must be meaningful. There must be some purpose or meaning to this life. What is it? Why are we here? What's it all for? These kind of core questions, which I believe most children, most human beings ask, or if we're sufficiently safe enough to be able to not just be worrying about food and kind of basic security every day of our lives. It's these core questions like, what is this life? Why are we here? So this, I would argue, is the fundamental question that living beings ask. It's at least the fundamental questions living beings ask if they're safe and secure enough to be able to be kind of fully alive. don't argue with me too much about that. Kind of didn't mean to say that. But this is, if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this kind of classic model of human experience. So you kind of get the sort of just like being safe, and then you get kind of being kind of well, and then you get being happy, and then you get, so what next? What is this life? And this, I think, is for me, is the core. This has been the core question in my life. What is this life? What does it? What is it? Why are we here? And so what I want to say, what I'm going to seek to communicate to you is that I think that kind of myths are. I think this is an essential, this is an inevitable question that all human beings ask, and I think myths is the fundamental way in which we answer this. So in that sense, it's personal. What is it that moves you? What do you care about? So that's what I'm going to seek to articulate or explore with you. Another way of putting this, what is he on about? So one of a frequently quoted saying of Sangharakshita's is that we need to find emotional equivalence to our intellectual understandings. We need to find emotional equivalence to our intellectual understandings. So all of you in this room have a basic intellectual understanding of what it is to lead a good life. But of course, as we all know, it's not so easy to do that. And that's where the emotional equivalence is. And where does emotion live? Emotion lives in the myths and the stories of our lives. So they all kind of twine together. So now we've got this image of uniting the myths. So what do I mean by that? So I kind of take it for granted that because you're all in this room or in your rooms at home, listening to me talking, that the myth of the Dharma has moved you to the extent to which you're in this room. So the myth of the Dharma is this story that human beings are capable of growth, that we can change, that awareness is revolutionary, that can transform us. So that's that's the core myth of the Dharma. And we can, you could spend hours and years talking about all the significant symbols of Buddhist iconography. That's a whole worthwhile thing to talk about. Mike Shah was doing that on Tuesdays at the moment for Going Deeper course. But I'm going to, for the sake of moving on, I'm going to kind of take it as read that we've got some sense of this kind of like the myth of Buddhism as being the possibility of human growth and freedom. What I'm going to speak about this evening is this idea of uniting the myths. So what is the other myth that we're trying to unite with Buddhism? This is the myths of the rest of our lives, of our childhood particularly. And the reason I want to talk about this is because my impression is that Buddhism is a set of nice ideas. We can kind of get interested and inspired by the nice ideas. We can read the books, we can say, oh yeah, that's a nice idea, I should live my life like this. But it can be kind of a bit pale, a bit lifeless, a bit sort of in the realm of nice ideas, unless there's energy that kind of, this myth needs to be nurtured, it needs to be kind of have nutrients, it needs to, jumping around in my imagery here a bit. If you imagine this is like a plant, and this plant needs to be in kind of fertile soil, it needs the sun and the rain to nurture it so it can grow. What is the sun and the rain? What is the nutrients which nurture it? There's two things. There's the direct, immediate experience of pain, which motivates us to change our lives. So that's a whole nother thing, which we could go into another time. But all of you, being human beings, will have experienced pain, and you'll be like, I want. So this sense of transformation and movement is to some extent motivated by pain, of course, because that's what it is to be a human being. But we need to be motivated by more than pain. Pain isn't enough. So we still have this thing, so what is it? And it's sort of, like, I'm not interested in living a life which is just trying to get away from pain. It's like, that's not enough for me. It's kind of, it's just like, it's too, I can't quite put it into words. It's like, well, it's just like, I just don't want it. It's got to be more than pain, because otherwise you're just trying to get away from pain. It's not enough. It's not enough to lead a satisfying life. So what else is there? There's the beauty, there's the imagination, there's a sense of possibility. And where does that come from? well, in a way, that's a question I'm going to invite you to talk about when you ping off into little groups and to reflect. But I would suggest that one of the key areas it comes from is drawing in and activating these kind of the core kind of stories and images of our lives, which are already vivid and alive for us and move us. So now we come to dragons. Hooray! So yeah, so that's quite a lot of abstraction. So just to speak personally for a moment. So as I said, so as a young boy, I had this sort of this kind of this longing for just this sense that there's got to be more to life than this. There's got to be some sense of meaning, some sense of just something. It's just like can't be enough to like you get up and you run around. It's like I had a perfectly pleasant childhood, so it's not like I was having a difficult time, but I was just like, is this it? So and I remember this sort of like, so some of you, I've told this story so many times, I feel slightly embarrassed on it, but anyway. So I remember as like I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 year old child, 6 or 7 actually, kind of rooting around under my parents' double bed. And it's like my parents are kind of fairly relaxed, open people, but there's something about places in life which are like significant or magical. So there's something about under my parents' bed, which was this. It's like it's this other space, isn't it? It's like there's something. It's like a little different realm. It's a realm of it's like it's a bit like Narnia or something. Like there's something secret, something mysterious. So I remember kind of rooting around under my parents' bed for whatever reason. I don't know where they were, and I found this box. And it was this little black box. It's about this big. Bearing in mind I'm 6 or 7, so that's quite big for 6 or 7, but it's not bad. And it was a black box, and it had a white cover, and it had red letters over the top of it. It had 2 words: Dungeons and Dragons. And I can feel this kind of rise of energy from my body just as I say those words. So it was just something about that just totally enthralled and spellbound me. Kind of immediately, I just knew that I wanted whatever this was. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that this was it. In a particular kind of way. So kind of pulled it out and sat down. So those of you who aren't familiar, Dungeons and Dragons is a role-playing game where you kind of imagine that you're like a wizard or a warrior and you run around killing monsters and blah, blah, blah. It can be a very sort of superficial and childish thing. It can be a really delightful exploration of different aspects of being and the consequences for actions depending on how mature you are as you engage with it. So it used to be a really niche thing. It's now much more popular than it was like 5 years ago. You know, lots of Hollywood actors make videos about how they play it and all of that. If you're curious, then you can ask people about it. A few people here play, so you could ask me or them about it. But really, this is this thing. So for me, this was a whole entry into like the core myth of my life, as it were. So this is where it's important that, because what I'm seeking to do in this is I'm not telling you that you should go and get into Dungeons and Dragons. Don't worry. I'm sort of inviting you to reflect. Oh, what is a sort of comparable experience for me? That's the point. And I'm just using my story as an example. So for me, it was just this, I just kind of fell headlong into this world of imagination and possibility and story. And it just totally enthralled me and spellbound me that, here we are, like nearly 40 years later, like 36, 37 years later, and it's like my being's capacity for interest in this is functionally limitless. You know, like I've been sick this week, and I've read thousands of pages of fantasy novel in the last week. I don't know, like 1,500 pages of fantasy novel in the last week. You know, it's just like my psyche will just like take it in constantly. And I've watched a few movies, and like it's just bonkers. So I'm quite extreme. For you, it might be more like, kind of what is it? Was it something else? That's okay. Everyone has different things. So for me, it was. So for me, this image of myth, it's like it is quite strongly. So like this idea of like myth is fantasy, it's imagination, it's like magic and dragons. That's it with the dragons, I'm afraid. And so for you, the myth might be something much more, well, there's all kinds of myths, aren't there? So just give you some examples of different forms of myths. So of course there's the core myths of this life, aren't there? Like there's the myth of marriage. It's like, you know, so yeah, kind of without genderizing that, because of course all kinds of different people can be really, yeah, like delight in all kinds of different things. But for some people, this myth of marriage and home and this projected future, that can be a really, really strong myth. That's just as valid a myth as the myth of dragons. There, I'm going to come on to something else about it in a minute. But it's like, so it could be the myth of marriage and home. It can be the myth of dragons and magic. It can be the myth of discovery. One of my best friends as a young boy, he wanted to be a submariner, and kind of like be on nuclear submarines. That's what he really, really wanted. At this kind of core age between like 6 and 10 and 12, when you're really kind of open to this sense of what is this life? What do you want to be? And of course, the other major one is fame. So it's like footballers, musicians, artists, whatever it is. So I'm just trying to lay out these kind of core things. So you've got home, family, kind of fame, kind of changing the world, which really, I'll come back to that in a minute. That's what Dungeons and Dragons is really about. It's a myth of significance, of making the world a better place. It could just be a really strong story of wanting to help people, wanting to be a nurse or a doctor or a vet or a scientist. So these key stories about this life of what we want to be when we grow up. I wanted to be Spider-Man. My friend wanted to be a submariner. Maybe you wanted to be like the most famous kind of fashion photographer, or I don't know what you wanted to be when you grow up. A scientist. Maybe you are what you wanted to be when you grow up. Who knows? So that's enough on this. So uniting the myths. So depending on where you are in your life's journey, this may seem like a long time ago, or you might feel like you've really successfully done this. So I think one of the things we have to do, certainly I've had to do, is because as we move through our lives, so as a young child, we've got this sense of dream possibility, haven't we? And then normally what happens is life kind of like beats us around the head a bit and says, no, you can't have that. You can't be, you know, the next Madonna. You can't write the best American movie. You can't be Spider-Man. Why can't I be Spider-Man? I still want to be Spider-Man. It's a different story. So we can become cynical. We can close down to the sense of hope and possibility. So in a way, what I would say is really, really simple. But I think it's really important. So there's something for me which I genuinely believe we all need to do, and that is to sort of consciously re-own and re-examine these things which move us, either from our childhood or from all of our lives, and I give them their space, give them their time, and help them inform our lives rather than make us sort of disappointed or kind of feel like our lives are failures. So a few months ago, I read a really cheesy Richard and Judy recommended novel called The Midnight Library. Some of you might have read it. It's fine, like it's really, really tacky, but it's quite sweet actually. And I'm going to totally spoil it for you, but it's incredibly predictable, so you don't need to worry. Basically, it's about this young woman who had incredible potential, but life has screwed her over. So one day she decides to end her life, so that's quite serious. And she is in the middle of committing suicide. And she's sort of transported into this mythical experience where she's in this library, which is like this near-death experience. And she goes on this journey where she can open a book and she can access an alternative life which she hasn't lived. So it's like you know, multiverse, many lives theory. So she has this whole little journey where she tries out all these different lives, where she's famous, where she does this, where she does that, where she does this, where she does that. Blah, 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 blah. Very sweet story. And And actually, and it's, yeah, as I say, it was really quite predictable. So I was surprised that by the time I got to the end of it, I actually found it quite moving. So, because of course, what she's got to come to terms with is a sense of disappointment and unfulfilled dreams. So that's part of for all of us, isn't it? It's like we haven't, you know, we have this story of what our life's going to be like, and it never quite lives up to our dreams. And that's kind of disappointing. And what happens to her is that she realizes that she's over-focused on the outcome and lost touch with the like the core values of the stories and the dreams. And she can live out those dreams because it's not about where you get to, it's about having those qualities present in your life. So in a way, this is the core thing that I'm seeking to communicate to you. So just to give you some examples, so like my friend who wanted to be a submariner, what he realized was that it's like being a submariner for him was a metaphor for being like deeply, like in touch with the depths of life, with the sort of, with the depths of his being, rather than actually submarine. So he's an ordained Buddhist. So he's kind of like, he's got a sense of that myth has found a way of, he deliteralized the myth and it's found expression in his life already. It's alive in his life now. So I think this is just, we have to do this because otherwise we're just going to live this life of like kind of frustration of not being a pop star, or whatever it is, not being Spider-Man. But it's deeper than that actually. Then rather than being a bit frustrated, we can, this energy can kind of, this energy can then, whatever I'm trying to communicate by doing that, kind of fertilize or lift up or kind of inform our lives so that rather, we feel fully and vividly alive. That's the hope. That's a bit of a stretch, but I think it's kind of true. So for me, this has been around, well, this kind of like this kind of, in a way, this somewhat. So of course, this is where you might be thinking, oh, this is just me and my psychology. Maybe it's not true for you at all. Or you can go and talk about that in groups. That's fine. So for me, it's like this desperate need for life to be meaningful, for life to be meaningfully generally, and for my life to be important. I think that's why I've been so kind of drawn to these myths of dragons and superheroes for my whole life, because it's like life, you know that your life is important because you're kind of battling evil and kind of saving the day and saving the city or saving the world. So it's a way of just making sense of the sort of like the littleness of my own life. And so somehow I've got to come to peace with that. Come to be at peace with that. It's like I'm not some hero, I'm not saving the day, I'm not saving the world. And that's okay. But actually, so it's like, so there's a sense of coming to be at peace with that. But and there can be a sense of kind of sadness or grief in all of that. But then underneath that, there can be a sense of kind of beauty and richness. But well, life is meaningful. I do trust that desire to make a positive difference in life is being manifested and lived out in my life. Right? Like talking to all of you, like I am sort of living out this core myth of my life in a more modest but real fashion. And in a way, so it's sort of like it's sort of coming down from this like youthful, idealistic, ungrounded sort of dream to like a mature, lived reality, which is just very satisfying and real. So in a way, that's it's got to be real, isn't it? So that's enough on that bit. So uniting the myths. So hopefully I've done some kind of job of evoking this sense of trying to bring these kind of deeper currents of our lives into a relationship with practicing Buddhism. So quick little commercial break now. So next week, I'm going to be interviewing Steel Bandu. That'd be nice, sitting over there. And this is So Stirabandhu, yeah, okay. So hopefully Stirabandhu realises this. So this is going to be this is going to be a co-recurring theme throughout the rest of the year. But we're going to be doing these interviews with different order members around the Sangha. And really what we're going to be trying to explore is this question of like, this business of uniting these myths. So like, how do we make sense of who and what we are in relation to trying to practice Buddhism? So it's this core question all of us have to ask. Who am I? What's important to me? What is my life? And how does Buddhism relate to my life? So that's what I'm going to be talking to Stirabandhu about. And we'll be hearing his story. So like, I'm trying to set a scene here, and then these followers... trying to set you up as well, yeah. These following weeks, we'll be talking about this business of bringing... Well, what is it? What is our experience of coming into this life, our formative experiences, how that influences our coming into contact with the Dharma, and how the Dharma then, how we then make sense of the Dharma through the rest of our lives. This three-stage thing. Who we were before we came into contact with Dharma, how that shapes our initial experience of Dharma, and then what we do once we've done that. So this kind of core movement of our lives. And I think I'm really looking forward to hearing different people's stories, friends, like different hearing. So I'll be interviewing Stirabandhu, asking him questions to draw out that story of his life, and then we'll be doing something else. So we won't be doing it every week, but it'll be kind of like a major thing for the next kind of few months. So this kind of these stories, so you can be watching for these kind of like these myths, these stories which we bring into our lives, and how they shape our experience, how they shape what we do with our time, how they shape our encounter with them, and how they shape what happens next. But there's, in terms of tonight's theme, there's a second part to it, honouring the different aspects of ourselves. So some of you will have already vividly encountered this, but a quick health warning, that these different aspects of ourselves, what doesn't tend to go so well is when we say, oh, I was into this, I'm into Buddhism now, so therefore this bit should just become like nice Buddhist, and then we'll go on and have a happy, nice life. That doesn't go so well, you'll be surprised to hear. So I'll tell you a little story from Sangharakshita's life. Many of you have heard this before. So Sangharakshita was, as a young man, he was really initially as a young man, he just really was really into poetry and art and philosophy, and so he like read loads of poets, really loved kind of a Western European visual art and culture in all of its forms, really into that. And then he got into Buddhism, and then he was over in India practicing Buddhism very intensively. And he had this experience of really intense conflict of self. So he had this, what he described as Sangharakshita 1 and Sangharakshita 2. I can't quite remember why I ran that well. So he's got this sort of like, so let's say Sangharakshita 1 is the Buddhist part. And he's like, right, Buddhism says, meditate all the time, get rid of all this namby-pamby art and poetry. That's a distraction, you're going to meditate all the time. And Sangharakshita 2 starts saying, well, you've meditated all morning. This afternoon, you want to laze around looking up at the sky, reading Keats's poetry or whatever. And basically, they were having this kind of like psychic conflict. And it got quite extreme to a point, at one point, it's like quite a high level of psychic disintegration in a sense. At one point, Sangharakshita 2, the artist, the poet, kind of re-emerged into consciousness and discovered that Sangharakshita 1 had burnt his entire life's work of poetry. So he'd just been writing little poems for like a couple of decades. And Sangharakshita 1 just said, no, we're not doing this anymore, and burnt all of them. And this triggered this like psychic crisis for Sangharakshita was like, this is screwed up. And what he realized is that he needed to integrate them. And he had this other particularly striking experience where he was talking about poetry. And he realized that in talking about poetry, he was talking about the truth. And he realized that this sort of split between poetry and Buddhism didn't need to be quite so acute, and actually they could be unified. And he sort of had this process of psychic synthesis, and then Sangharakshita 3 emerged, which was much more unified in that piece. So there's a few things to take from that. One of the key one is don't burn all your poetry, whatever the equivalent is. So you're probably laughing, but I've got friends who kind of gave away all of their CDs because they're like, oh, I'm getting into Buddhism, I shouldn't listen to music anymore. Did you do that? Yeah, Shantipava did that.
Huge collection of movies. And
yeah. It's like, I'm into Buddhism now.
It completely fell apart.
Yeah, it doesn't work. So this idea of honouring the different parts of yourselves, the key message here is, and this is, I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to do this quickly. It's like what we need to do is kind of learn integration isn't about making all of ourselves Buddhist. Integration is about learning how to say, okay, there's this bit of me which is into practicing Buddhism. This bit of me, how is what is important to me? How can that influence and kind of give strength and energy to my desire to be free and to practice the truth? Practice for truth, whatever that means, to be free, to be kind. But that doesn't mean to say that this bit goes away. So, for example, I still read lots of fantasy novels, I still play board games, and for a long time, it felt like that was a problem, and I need to sort of like make this part go away to practice Buddhism more fully. I don't believe that at all anymore. I believe that this part, the sort of the core, what moves me is actually nurturing this part. But if I tried to say, okay, that's it, no more fantasy novels, this bit would be like, it really doesn't work. So it's just like, it's honouring the different parts of ourselves, being at peace with all the different parts of ourselves. So Buddhism has this image of mandalas. So I think what a mandala represents is what we're trying to do is we're trying to have growth and life and love at the middle, awareness at the middle of that being, and all these different other aspects of our lives around it. And what we're trying to do is not have any bits of this which actively screw over this, which kind of stop this working, and ideally which kind of nurture this and help it grow more fully. But these bits are still here. These bits are still here. And it can take a long time, and possibly never, for these bits to go away. So I don't think I'm ever going to stop playing board games. I'm never going to stop reading fantasy novels. I don't need to. I don't believe. So honouring all the different aspects of selves. So what we're trying to do is stop living this life where, because normally what happens, and you're all super familiar with this, it's like you say, right, I'm going to go to bed early and get up and go to the gym and meditate, blah, blah, blah. And then this other part, so this part of Mandala is saying, this is what we're going to do. And then this part of Mandala says, no, screw you, we're going to watch Netflix until 2 a.m. And then this part doesn't wake up. So that's the core thing we want to avoid. And the way we do it is by being aware and saying, okay, no, all of this is within the mandala of my life. How can this part kind of nurture and help this part grow? That's a question. And I think a key way of doing this, to go back to the myths, is to understand what myth, what story, what quality is this part of my life expressing? And how can I understand that less literally and therefore have it kind of nurture my desire to grow? So in my case, just winding up now, this has been this longing for magic and mystery and meaning in the world, and to make a difference, and seeing that those qualities can manifest in my practice of the Dharma. That may look quite different for you, of course, but that's okay.